Hey guys, so you're hearing the spitter spatter of the rain. It's dark, it's evening, and this is the perfect moment to talk about books. I have not made myself a cup of tea. I regret it, yes, but that's okay. We are in good company of the books, the dear books. I love them. So I have lied in the title of this video. This is not a February reading wrap up. This is a February and January reading wrap up, as I have neglected to make one for January. Many reasons contribute to that, which I'm not gonna get into because who cares? We really only care about the books here. I cannot wait. I cannot wait until the end of the year to talk about the books of January that I really liked and those that I liked a bit less, but that are still relevant to talk about, I believe. The first book that I read was Journal of a Solitude by May Sarton, which is basically a journal that she wrote in the time span of a year. So May Sarton is a poet, but she also wrote a lot of novels and a lot of nonfiction. In the beginning of this book, you can see a very long list of books that she wrote. So she was a very prolific writer, and so I was very curious to read this, mainly because I really like to read sometimes these kind of writers' journals. And I thought that the theme of this journal was particularly interesting, as I have been contemplating on solitude a lot throughout the years, how often it is really just what we need to get into a certain creative space. She writes about all of the mental and physical space that you need in order to get into that creative flow. She is basically writing about also her garden, which she tends to throughout the seasons. It's in New Hampshire, so that was pretty interesting to read because I kind of felt that I was there and that I could picture it. So I think she's a really good writer. I think I just would have enjoyed it a bit more if I had read any of May Sarton's books before. Did it make me want to read any of her other books? Yes. I'm really curious to read her now. I don't know where to start though because of this very long list of books. It was good. I wonder. So if any of you have any recommendations of where to start with her, I would love to hear that. At the time that I was reading it, I wasn't really in the mood, let's say. Like, it was nice, but I feel like at the beginning of the year I was really in the mood for fast-paced, or at least very absorbing kind of fiction, specifically fiction. So last year I read so much nonfiction and I really enjoyed it. It was a phase, and I feel like I'm going back into my fiction phase. Or I don't know, maybe it's not a phase. Maybe this year is fiction themed. Who knows? We will find out. This year I've kind of decided that I'm not gonna waste any more time with books that I don't really vibe with. If I really have a hard time getting into the story, let's say by page 50, I will give it up. However, that being said, I read The Goldfinch in the beginning of this year, which has become one of my favorite books, I think, of all time. And this was one of these books that I DNF'd years ago, but I feel like it's not because I didn't like it. I feel like it's because I specifically knew that it wasn't the time. And when you know it's not the time for a certain book, and the book is 900 pages, I don't know how many pages is this edition is, almost 1,000 pages. So when you know it's not the time, it's a pretty big commitment, and I didn't want to force myself. And I'm glad I didn't, because I feel like this year was actually the perfect time to read it. I had first read The Secret History of Donna Tartt's, loved it. Like many people, like many of you, of course, why not? Donna Tartt is the story of Theodore Decker. It starts when he's 12 years old, and the catalyst of the whole story is basically the death of his mom after they have gone to a museum, and she was talking about art, and she was talking about paintings that she really liked. And from the beginning, you can already feel the immense love that Theo has for his mother. And that is explained by the fact that they are kind of like this duo. She doesn't have a lot of family. The father is a bit of a dickhead, kind of leaves them alone and kind of goes away. So she dies, which is not it's not a big surprise, because it's the beginning of the book and it's also written at the back. And so the gallery exploded, there was some sort of attack, and Theo just takes one of the paintings that his mother was obsessively talking about. And this is the painting of the Goldfinch, which is, I researched, apparently a real painting. And so you have all these the exploration of what this painting is and the history of it, and then you, in the book, you go really deep into the art world and into the antique dealing world and into how sort of the organized crime scene intersects with the art world. So it was fascinating. It's really one of these novels that give you such good writing, but also great character development, great plot twists, great everything. It's just perfect. Really, if you're looking for a novel that you know you will get absorbed in, you will like this book. I don't know what to tell you. There's Russian mobsters, there's Amsterdam, there's dickhead dads, there's the bonds that you create when you're a teenager. There is even an LSD trip, and how it's described is so beautiful. I underlined it and I thought, how did Donna Tartt manage to put that into words? All I do know, and all we do know, is that she writes a book, well, she publishes a book around every 10 years. She should have already published a book, according to fans on Reddit, like last year or something. That didn't happen, so we're still waiting for it. At some point, I read a play, Red Light Winter by Adam Rapp, which was recommended by a YouTuber. I also remember in my acting days that I had rehearsed this scene once. I remember rehearsing it and I hadn't read the whole play. We were performing scenes, but I knew the story a bit. So when I saw this video wherein she recommended this, I thought, yeah, oh my gosh, that rings a bell, and it reminded me. And so I decided to read it. I feel like it's very difficult to judge plays because a play, I feel like it has to be acted out, and the energy of the delivery is what, determines the play. However, that being said, it's true that if you have a bad script from the start, then maybe the play won't be as good. I don't know if it was that, I don't know. Personally, I didn't really like it. I thought I would, because usually, the tastes of that creator, the books that she likes, I usually like. So I was a bit disappointed, especially that I remember my acting teacher saying that this was great as well. So I didn't like it. I thought it was a bit misogynistic. Maybe that's the point. Maybe it's, I don't know. I thought it was a bit crass, and I just thought that the female character was sadly two-dimensional. It's basically about two best friends who go to Amsterdam and they fall in love with the same prostitute, who is this student that has to be a hooker to pay for her studies. And she's really interesting because in the beginning she speaks with a fake French accent, and then you realize that she's actually from the US and she actually has a Midwestern accent. I didn't really get that part. I don't know. It was just a bit weird because the way that the men were acting in front of her was a bit like, I don't know. I found them a bit unlikable. Maybe that's the point again. I don't know. I have read a few plays. I have performed a few plays, and this was not my favorite. That's all I have to say. Maybe I shouldn't say more. If you want to read a play, I suggest Heartbreak House. I think that's my favorite play ever. Yep, definitely is. I feel like I'm gonna crescendo to the books that I loved the most near the end. So here I remember I put the piles of the books that I didn't really like that much, and one of them was The Hero of This Book by Elizabeth McCracken. Now, no, it's not that I didn't like it. I have a really hard time rating memoirs, that is, if they're clearly memoirs, which this was clearly not. By which I mean the author often kind of writes these meta passages about how this is not a memoir, or this is not a novel either, and it was just a bit confusing. It kind of took me out of the narrative a bit, which is really upsetting because it's a topic that I find really important, and I find important to discuss in literature and important to write about, and that is the mother-daughter relationship. The author writes about the death of her mother Apparently this was not a memoir nor autobiographical, which she underlined several times in the book. But then I think it actually did happen, but yeah, it was a bit confusing. A lot of people reviewed this either very well, saying it doesn't really matter whether it's a memoir or not, whatever. It was just really well written, and I agree, it was very well written. There were moments that I found quite moving and that were, yeah, just beautiful, but I feel like it would have been more powerful if it was either clearly a memoir or clearly a novel. And anyway, I feel like in cases that it's not very clear, where it's not even mentioned, I feel like the narrative is more powerful. But I don't know what effects the author sought to create, because I can imagine that the subject of your mother's death is a difficult one to write about. So it's also a bit double. So yeah, it sucks a bit to rate this book not that great. But, you know, that's the life of a reader, I suppose, and the life of a writer. But I know that she found a good readership for this book, because a lot of creators and a lot of booktubers as well out there have actually really loved it. Poetry! 1,000 Mornings by Mary Oliver. Loved this little collection. I'm just gonna read all of Mary Oliver's work. 2 years ago, I read Upstream, which is a collection of essays. She mostly writes poetry, but ever since I read this one, it was my first Mary Oliver. I was haunted. I am haunted by the desire to read all of her books. So actually, this is my little Mary Oliver corner. So I'm gonna put this one back in the little Mary Oliver corner. There's fabulous pieces in there. And one of my next books this month is probably gonna be a Mary Oliver, actually. The month of February is not over yet, by the way. It is only the 22nd, I believe. The Beach by Alex Garland. The Beach is an old book. Well, old. Depends what you think of as old, but it's not recent. It's not very, very recent. I think it was published when I was young, girl. No, it was published before I was born. No, not at all. I don't know. Yes. First published 1996. I was 1 year old when it was published, so yeah, I was very, very small. It's great. It's basically the story of this guy who is a backpacker in Thailand, and one night he's in this hostel, and there's a man there, a weird guy talking to himself. So the character, the protagonist, the narrator of the story, is very intrigued by him, and the next day he receives a map to an apparently secret island. There's a rumor going around, backpackers and travelers as well, that there is this island that is paradise. At the back you have the classic coming-of-age novel telling of a paradise lost and found and lost. And so he's given this map by this strange man who then kills himself in like one of the most gruesome ways. And so this is the story of how he sets out with a couple of French backpackers to find this island, and what they find is this sort of Eden-like hippie community in one of these islands that people don't really go to because it's not known as being an island, a touristy island. It's actually really challenging to get there, and their little lagoon is also very challenging to find once you're on the island. So it's really interesting, very much a thriller. There's a movie that's been made with Leonardo DiCaprio, young Leonardo. I don't know if it's any good. Apparently, Rotten Tomatoes says it's not that great, but maybe you even know the movie and not the book. If you've seen the movie, you liked it or didn't like it, I still suggest to read the book. It was fun, it was intriguing, it was a really good ride. I enjoyed reading this in the middle of winter, super cold outside, imagining myself in the warm embrace of Southeast Asian paradise. That's where I come from, and so it was nice to read about that. And also it's interesting because I was in Thailand last summer, the first time I've ever been. So yeah, you're pretty much hooked from the beginning. It's a really fast-paced book, very well written as well. Sexy, it's exciting, and I think it's one of my new favorite books as well. I think it's gonna stay on my top. It's absorbing. It's I can't wait to read the next chapter. Not only because the story is good, but also because the writing is good. And the writing was really, really sublime. The character reminded me of a friend of mine, and I find it funny because the characters are smoking joints all the time, and it reminded me of my youth. Not that I'm old, but I don't smoke weed anymore. I used to smoke weed a lot, and I really had a good time reminiscing that. What I also found interesting about this book is that it's a critique as well of like these Southeast Asian islands that get so crowded with tourism. It's interesting that this is a thing in like 1996 when this was published. It was also something that I've been thinking a lot about last summer when I went back to the Philippines, having gone back to this island that I often vacationed when I was a girl, and how it was completely kind of ruined by capitalism and just like tourists. The Wager by David Grann, who also wrote Killers of the Flower Moon, a tale of shipwreck, mutiny, and murder. Yes. You heard that right, and I loved it. I loved it. So this is a crazy story. On the 28th of January, 1742, a ramshackle vessel of patched together wood and cloth washed up on the coast of Brazil. Inside were 30 emaciated men, barely alive, and they had an extraordinary tale to tell. They were survivors of His Majesty's ship, the Wager, which had left England 2 years earlier on a secret mission during an imperial war with Spain, and had been wrecked on a desolate island off the coast of Patagonia. May I just add here, 2 seconds, that I think the war was called the War of Jenkins' Ear. And I was amused by that. You may now judge me as someone with a very infantile sense of humor, and that will be true. The men, after being marooned for months, built the flimsy craft and sailed for more than 100 days, traversing nearly 3,000 miles of storm-racked seas. They were greeted as heroes. 6 months later, another even more decrepit craft landed on the coast of Chile. This boat contained just 3 castaways, and they told a very different story. So basically, you have this crew that, works for the crown of England, and they're supposed to, get this treasure, this booty, and it's like this really big long journey, and they have to go across the Drake Passage, which is known to be one of the most dangerous passages on Earth to cross. So they all leave, and then they get separated. The Wager gets separated from the rest of the fleet, and then they are in this desolate island, and it's not even like a sexy, nice warm island where there's lots of fruits or whatever, but no, there's nothing there. There's literally just wild celery. I think that's all there is. Anyway, they start to kill each other, eat each other, apparently. But the way that David Grann tells this story is super fascinating, because he basically just gives us passages from the journals of the important characters of the event, and how they have really spent, I don't know, they've just gone through so much. It's kind of incredible. You're like, this can't have happened, but yes, it did happen. I'm fascinated by these kind of tales because they're from a time that is so different from ours, and I often think about like how humans used to live, or I often think about how humans across the centuries, but this wasn't really a long time ago. In terms of lifetimes, it was like, 5 lifetimes ago, if a lifetime is 100 years. So that was an interesting book. I highly suggest it. I half read it, half listened to it on audiobook. The audiobook is great. The narrator, the person reading the book, is really mesmerizing. The voice was pretty sweet. So if you're down to listen to these kind of tales, this is a good audiobook. Thank you for watching the video so far. So yeah, the thing is, when I shot this video, it was pretty late. I was experiencing a lot of technical issues, and I had been trying to shoot that video for about 4 hours, the one that you have just seen. And so I didn't get to finish actually my wrap up, and decided to just divide it into 2 videos. So this is a 2-part series. You can find the second part either on the link below if enough time has passed. If not, then yeah, it'll just pop out at some point in the coming days after this one is up, and I'll see you on the other side to talk about even more books, amazing books. These past months have been incredible. I always say, oh, I just read my new favorite book, and it's just true.